3, 2, 1. Hey guys, welcome back to the Hukt podcast. I'm your host Kushaj. These are your other hosts, Hiren, Umar, and Tanay. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about worker exploitation, all of that fun stuff. So Umar, do you want to start us off with some quick news?
News, sure. Midweek, Manchester City versus Atletico Madrid ended 1-0 to Man City on aggregate, with Phil Foden being pulled off the pitch by Stefan Savic, who later got a red card for Mr. Jimenez. Wow, big news. Anything else about football, guys?
I think, first of all, that clearly brings it into our topic, right? Because that's clearly exploiting Phil Foden. So that's a key example of worker exploitation there. But I think that example brings us into a key example of worker exploitation in the current day. So we've got the Qatar World Cup, right, guys? I mean, the World Cup, everyone looks forward to it for as long as they can remember. I mean, as soon as the 2018 World Cup ended in Russia, I was already thinking, I want Qatar to come as soon as possible. But along with that, in its course of the stadiums being built, the country being made ready, there was a lot of problems because they had over 6,500 workers who had to die due to the poor conditions, the excessive heat in some cases, and what seems to be a trend is that majority of those workers were from mostly Africa and Asia. To name a few countries: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So this is actually one of the biggest cases of worker exploitation, which we see on the news in today's day and age. That's especially, and what's strange about that is that it's celebrating one of football's greatest events, yet it's also got such a dark side to it. What do you guys think about worker exploitation in today's day and age?
Well, obviously it's awful. You can always make links back to what happened in the past with slavery and everything that happened with that. So I think in this day and age, in 2022, it's obviously wrong for workers to be exploited like this, no matter where they come from. Even if labor laws are different in different countries, they should still be respected by human rights around the world.
I agree with that, right? I think I saw a statistic. It's like in our modern world is like the most amount of slaves that we've ever had in history, and exploited workers compared to the past. And it's like amazing considering that we've gotten so many of these labor laws protecting all of these workers. But I think what's really happening, right? If you look at the developed world, you look at the US, you look at places like that, right? They already have labor laws protecting from the exploitation of workers. Where you really need to look is all of these undeveloped countries. I'm gonna call some places out, like you got Africa, you have the African continent, and then you also have a little bit of South America, right? And all of this worker exploitation is mainly because their governments don't really care. I think that's the main thing, right? If your government cared, they'd do something about it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think obviously the governments don't care, and I think it's because of the persuasion of bringing in foreign influence to a country. Big businesses are more likely to move to different countries because of the labor laws in that area, because labor is just cheaper there, right? So I think this is the point that these countries are making, because it's just easier for them to entice big conglomerates because of their restrictions, which are fairly low, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing that we should also consider is how this sort of excessive working hours that these sort of workers have to do as well, especially coming into places like Qatar and stuff, where they have to work way more for no reason, but at the same time it's unfair. And I think the government should do more to sort of prevent this from happening, not just in first world countries, also third world countries, to say. What about you? Anybody else? What else do we think?
So I do think that just back to the Qatar thing again, that the time when the international labor standards were set in place, that was 2017. And for those of you who do know about how long it takes for a World Cup country to be developed, that's very far into when Qatar actually started developing its country for the World Cup. I think, Umar, you tell me how many years in advance are a country told about when they can host a World Cup? Around a decade, right?
I think bids are made 15 years, and then they stop preparing 10 years.
Yeah. So if you take a look at the bids, right? Then you say 15 years in advance, the fact that the labor standards were set just 4 or 5 years ago, that's pretty late. And if we're having labor standards set that late in these countries where workers are exploited, then what about the time before those standards were set? Then there is no restrictions on what the labor is put through. So that's really like dangerous because of how much attention that got. Then they had the restrictions set in place. But what about countries where there isn't that much attention given to the workers? Then they might not even have standards set. So then that speaks a lot about exploitation. How unless it has attention from the media, it might not actually be brought to light. So that's something which is pretty big in today's day and age.
Yeah, and I think the global response to what's been happening in Qatar, like I'd say, isn't really good enough, to be honest, because you see legends promoting what's going on in Qatar by hosting the draw, stuff like that. I think Eric Cantona is the only notable person that I know of that's officially said that he wants nothing to do with it, and that said this World Cup is pretty much just a skip on for him. And I think you see the England national team, who've been working with Amnesty International, they're saying they're not gonna skip this World Cup because they believe for some reason that it might be better for them to actually promote the World Cup because it helps raise awareness that way for some reason. So I think the international response to what's going on isn't really good enough. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think they're not even respecting the workers as well. A large part of the labor workforce in many countries is the workers and the people who are building stadiums, building sort of the infrastructures and things like that. And I think it's kind of like a wake up message for the government, because doing this consistently, and because this has happened in several occasions, not just in Qatar, but I think in previous stadiums. I know in India when they're creating the sort of cricket stadiums, there was one that I think it was made in Mumbai, and that one had 250 sort of workers that died just because they were working on that one stadium. So it shows it's a scary thing. That's the point. It's a scary thing, and it shouldn't scare workers and their safety as well. Their safety shouldn't be sort of disregarded, because that's the most important.
I think the worst part of what's going on in Qatar is that it's not Qatari workers that are the ones who are dying. It's not even the ones that are working on the project. It's the fact that they've taken workers from other countries and brought them here so that they can work on it. Which, I mean, I don't want to say it's racist, but it kind of is in a way, right? Because they're taking workers from foreign countries, bringing them here, and neglecting their basic standard needs. So I think that's one of the biggest problems about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that link between. I mean, I guess you can kind of say that is linked with racism, because it is in a way kind of saying that you think that labor from outside is easier to dispose of. That there's so much of it that you can easily just get away with them facing consequences, but you don't want that your country, the standards are at risk, so you don't want to put your own people on the line. That's the problem, right? That all of a sudden people from the outside are okay to put on the line, but your own people, because that the standards aren't fit, you don't want to put them into the work. Or it might just be because you think outside labor is cheaper. So that you're right, that I think there is some kind of link.
It's as you said, right, they're doing this because the outside labor is cheaper. And Umar also mentioned how the outside response has also been kind of lacking. The question is, all of these people, I mean, I'm not too big on football, so I'm not too sure on how actually widespread this is, right? But I presume that it has a decent amount of coverage, right? Now, what I think is that all of these people who are commenting on it, all of these normal people, who make average incomes, they're talking all this stuff on social media. Oh, I care so much about these workers. But when it comes to it, right, the second they start employing people, this isn't pro exploitation, but the second they get actual workers in here, right, where you gotta actually give them benefits, give them a proper salary, your price goes up. And all of a sudden, you've got all these people on the other end who now have to face increased prices. At least for watching, I would say I'm not too sure about watching part, but at least for attending the game, right? But it is all these increased prices, and that's one of the main reasons that they would use these workers. So the question is, I guess it's not really a question, but it's you're exploiting these workers so that you can get a lower cost product, or at least a product where you can make more profits to the market. So it's like, obviously that's unethical, but the solution would be to find some way to de-incentivize companies to do this sort of behavior. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think there needs to be an international standard for things like minimum wage, where it's a global thing and it's not just first world countries being able to adopt these measures because of pressure from pressure groups. So I think it has to be an international wide thing so that stuff like this doesn't happen. Workers from third world countries don't get exploited. I think that's the main issue that's going on, because there needs to be an international standard, otherwise it's just going to keep happening.
Yeah, I think there should also be some sort of safety regulation worldwide, international safety regulations for things like building stadiums and stuff. Anyways, I think we should move on to our next segment, and this is children fleeing war in Ukraine.
Sorry, I just before we go on to the Ukraine thing, I just had a point that luckily there is the International Labor Organization, which does set international labor standards, but then the main thing is about countries actually following them, because it's easy to say that we're gonna follow this, labor shouldn't be exploited, yada yada, but actually when it comes to that, it's much more difficult than it sounds. But yeah, so Hiren, you can go on about Ukraine. So I just wanted to add that there.
No, yeah, that's the one thing we should focus on. Anyways, children fleeing war in Ukraine are at heightened risk of trafficking and exploitation. Since 24th of February, more than 1.5 million children have fled Ukraine as refugees, and 28% of identified victims of trafficking globally are children. So, what do you guys think?
I think
Coach, why don't you tell me what was what the IMF stood for last week? I think that's the test for today, right? What does the IMF stand for?
The IMF, I think as I was mentioning it last week, this is a really detailed program.
Alright guys, let's move on. We're talking about Ukraine now, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
Right.
We've done this argument before. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I was saying, right? So I feel like all of these countries, right? They're taking in all these Ukraine, like all these refugees, and you have all this worker exploitation, right? But the problem is, you have all these people who aren't actually from Ukraine that are also taking advantage of this. I think I also saw it a couple posts in the UK particularly, where you had people who looked nothing like Ukraine. I mean, I don't want to call anyone out, but these guys had darker skin tones and everything like that, not stuff that you'd expect from a Ukrainian person. And they carried false IDs. And they looked completely different from the person who was in the ID. And it was reportedly stolen by the cops. It's you have all these people who aren't actually refugees, who are taking advantage of this refugee wave. So I feel like all this worker exploitation of Ukrainian, refugees who are, unfortunately forced to move around the world, you should only start accepting these guys once you've got an actual system in place to make sure none of these guys are, lying, I guess, in order to take advantage of your own country's resources.
Yeah, and one thing that they're trying to do is try to set up these sort of blue dots. It's like a sort of system that the government, the UNICEF, that they're trying to do some sort of partnership together. And they're trying to set up this blue stops where there's only a one-stop safe space where children and women can come to. And so it provides key information to traveling families and helping to identify the unaccompanied sort of groups.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. But I think you'll definitely still see certain cases of people taking in refugees but using them for the wrong reasons, because obviously the Ukrainian people are down right now. They need to get out of the place. So I think it's very easy to exploit them right now, and certain individuals may take them in just for the sole purpose of gaining financially off of them, using them as labor, stuff like that. I know in the UK that if you take in Ukrainian refugees, you get a subsidy from the government. So I think there's definitely incentive there for people to exploit Ukrainians.
Yeah, because I mean, even if you look at the numbers, the number of people who have left Ukraine, it's in the millions. So if you've all of a sudden got that much of a disbalance in Europe, especially, then where do these people go? So you've got to make sure that the countries welcome them in the right way, and not just for exploitation, because that can easily happen if a country has a certain amount of Ukrainian refugees who have entered their country, if they don't have the right laws in place, the people could exploit them, because that's also a large influx in labor. So they've got to have those laws set in place which make sure that they're treated fairly.
Yeah, dude. Also, like the sort of these children that are displaced, that they're extremely vulnerable to like being separated from their families, man. It's just sad to see, but that's the world we live in right now.
All very saddening images. Now, moving on to chocolate. What do we think, Kushaj?
Alright, look, so basically, it was like, I think it was last year, when I went on a chocolate strike, if you will, where I actually didn't eat chocolate for 2 weeks. Now, you might be asking, why 2 weeks? Because I couldn't resist after 2 weeks, alright? Sue me, the chocolate just tastes that good. But, so, basically, I lost, and the reason I lost is because I was watching a couple of videos online, right? Obviously, the most trustworthy sources. There's this guy called Jay Tran, and he basically makes a bunch of videos regarding, big companies and their exploits against the workforce. And now what he presented, right, was a case where Nestle and all of your other big chocolate producers, what they do is they actually have this oligopoly set up, right? What they do is they go to Africa, they pull up to a cocoa farm, and they're like, you know what, I want your cocoa, but I'm only going to buy it from you for this really low, undervalued price. And then the cocoa farmer is like, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm just going to sell it to your competitor. They turn around to the next guy, he's selling it for the exact same price. It's like, they're just getting ripped off, basically. Now, all these cocoa farmers, well, congratulations, now you're making like pennies on the dollar, and you're meant to be making a lot more money, but now you have your family to feed, you have costs to control, you have all of this stuff, so what do they turn to? Child slavery. And basically, they tell all these kids in their neighboring African countries, that's where like they get all these farmers from. Now what they do is they tell them, look, I promise you a great life, you'll go to the United States, you'll get rich, you'll get so much money, and education. Now, all these guys, keep in mind, the education level, like your average level of education in Africa, is not that high compared to the Western world, right? So most of these guys don't know any better. So what ends up happening is these guys are just taken advantage of, and they're forced to work long hours. And it's like they could easily, I guess, if they wanted to pay more, they take care of these guys, but they don't. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think you see these cases all the time, right? Big companies going overseas, exploiting, well, not directly in this case, but exploiting workers. So I think it's just really a massive problem that we see all too much now in this day and age. And it's got to a point where governments can't even regulate it, because these big companies are bringing in so much business for them, right? Because this is a revenue stream for them, so they just don't really want to do anything about it. What do you think?
Yeah, that's where the government's dilemma falls into place, right? That what they might be thinking is that, look, we've got a population of 20 million, of which majority of them will benefit by our economic growth if we get more multinational corporations invest in our country. But at the same time, should they be worrying about, say, a handful of workers, maybe in the few thousands, if multinational corporations can benefit millions in their country? That's why you've got this is what I think, that why some communist countries, they don't really welcome foreign investments, because they want their people to prioritize themselves, and they don't want opportunities of their people to go away to others. Not saying what's right, what's wrong, but that's a difference, where countries which welcome foreign companies, while what the governments might be thinking is that, yeah, we're gonna have a few people fall into trouble, but majority of our people are gonna benefit from it. Not sure if that's right, not sure if that's wrong, but then there will always be some case of exploitation whenever you have foreign companies try to invest in underdeveloped countries.
Yeah, man. Dude, I think this is just companies taking advantage. This is companies taking advantage of what they can get. Just like what we talked about the Qatar stadium. It was easy for the sort of government system there to employ the workers from the outside, because they knew it would just be more advantageous for them to get their stadium done. Just like here, we're talking about what workers in third world countries, again, them making sort of like the cocoa and the sort of like products needed for chocolate, but they're not getting paid for that. Like, they're not getting paid the right amount for what they should get. There's no minimum wage enforced in the sort of system, and it just comes to show that companies like Nestle, they completely disregard this, and they don't really say much other than we are doing this to sort of support our workers, unlike companies like Fair Trade that actually say they're doing it, even though they might not be doing it. They do everything they can to sort of enforce and sort of bring light to this problem. What do you guys think?
Well, as you mentioned about fair trade, right? The thing is, these companies, they've been caught before. They've been caught with all of these farms, and they've been exposed before. Now the thing is, right? What they do, especially Nestle, they've established Kit Kat. They slap a fair trade logo on it, and they wait for the public to turn their eye to the next big problem. They just forget about what happened, right? The thing with fair trade chocolate, like we all, when we look at chocolate, we're just like, oh yeah, it's fair trade, it'll be fine. And I'm sure there's been no kids exploited in this. The thing is, though, they've actually found fair trade farms that have these workers, that have these child slaves in them, right? They have this worker exploitation still. All fair trade is just a label. Obviously you need to go through some labeling, you need to go through some rules, some regulations, and a due process. But at the end of the day, if there's been farms that have been caught with child slaves on them, it's like, well, who do I even trust anymore? Obviously, from my perspective, what I tried to do is go on that chocolate ban, right? But see, what I quickly realized after 2 weeks, as an excuse for myself that I could tell the world, is that I'm just one guy. It doesn't matter if they get my money or not, so they might as well get my money. And that's why I stopped after 2 weeks. So you know what? At the end of the day, I suppose it's nothing that we do or nothing that you do is really going to matter unless you actually get other people in on it.
Yeah, so just something back to the fair trade thing. Like, okay, let's just think of the nature of chocolates, right? That's something which, you're in a supermarket, your octopus has $6 left, you're willing to go into negative, but you can't spend too much money. Oh, there's a Cadbury chocolate bar for $9 at Circle K, let me just pick that up. I just had a quick search at other fair trade chocolates in Hong Kong, and the same bar, which is, let's say, around 40 grams, you can get that for around $19 in Hong Kong. Whereas a Cadbury bar, you might have that for $9 in Circle K. Now, I mean, that's just one example of what I've heard, of what I found. But even in other places, fair trade chocolates tend to have a higher cost with them. So something like a chocolate, which is like, it's like something which you just get, like it's a quick thing, you've got enough money for it, let me just get that quickly. Would people go out of their way to get fair trade chocolates if it costs more? So that's another thing, that doing the ethical thing, same thing goes for climate change, doing the ethical thing, trying to find the more sustainable option, that ends up costing more. So that's the problem in this case, that yeah, we're all ready to say that we want fair trade chocolate, but no one really wants to pay the higher price for it as well. So there is a big dilemma surrounding this.
Yeah, I think that links into what Shaq said. Like, what's the point of the individual doing it if the collective can't be bothered to do it right? What impact am I going to make if no one else does it as well? So I think that's the mindset that a lot of people have right now, because they just don't want to do it right, because they have such little impact on these big businesses that it doesn't really affect their mindset. It doesn't affect what they're choosing. So I think that really needs to change. I think that's about promotion of fair trade chocolate bars, and I think it's also about a collective boycotting of these big chocolate brands. Probably not going to happen, but we can hope. Theoretically, it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the next step forward. I think we need to sort of improve the way we bring this out, and we need to also sort of show, like, not just tell that we're doing this. It's sort of that like showing aspect, and I think fair trade took a step in that, but now the next generation of companies can probably see that forward.
Right, lads. So today I was wearing Nike trainers, so that helps with the segue. Nike sweatshops, guys, what do we think? You see a lot of the time, a lot of reports coming in about Nike exploiting workers in their Asian sweatshops. I think in 1991, a man called Jeff began publicizing the conditions of the Indonesian factories, which led to larger media coverage of Nike's overseas operations. So, what do we think about it?
Umar, you're asking us what do we think about it? Like we're
So-
about to say, "Oh my god, I love it, man! They should keep going."
You never
But-
know, man. There's some dodgy people in this podcast.
Oh,
Please.
oh, we haven't
What you-
thrown any
What you
accusations.
doing, all right? Is that Umar? Like you brought up 1991. If this was really taken seriously by Nike, we wouldn't have Nike in 2022. But guess what? It's like one of the biggest companies for shoes in the world. Why? Because what we've seen happen throughout the years keeps on happening. Deny, 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 and that's what just keeps on happening, right? Deny the claims that are made against you. If you've got enough money, you can shut down all the media claims and whatever. And that's just what Nike seemed to have done in the past few years, right? I mean, 1991 findings are released. 2022, they're probably as big as ever. So, quite clearly, like their denial seems to have gone them quite far, hasn't it?
Yes, I mean that's what these big companies do. They just deny, and these countries, there's no really no. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh my god. There's no motivation to act on these claims because what's the point? Because these big businesses, we see it time and time again. These big businesses are bringing finance into the country, increases GDP. So what's the point of the government imposing sanctions on them?
Oh, well, I have a great background going on there. But, look, what I think is I actually kind of disagree with you there. I feel like the government has every incentive to be shutting down, like, these sweatshops, right? And it's not just from a purely ethical point of view, especially in a democracy, right? When word gets out around town that you, under your jurisdiction, have been letting people get basically enslaved, get literally no money, you know, these are your people, your citizens, the same people you were elected to take care of, and you haven't been doing that, well, the second that happens, you're just done. Especially if that gets media attention, you're double done. And it's like, you know, I feel like that sort of incentive is definitely there. Now, what's not happening is the media actually, you know, giving it that spotlight. It's because so many events happen in the world, right? You can't just focus on one story. You have the war in, you have Ukraine versus Russia, right? And you're gonna have the next crisis going on, and the next one, and the next one. You know, you can't keep focusing on old news. I guess that's what really matters here. There's that media attention. That's where the public's eye gets diverted to.
And yeah, I mean, like, okay, like I think another thing with this is that it's similar to chocolate. Something like, okay, I'm gonna say Nike because that's how I've been pronouncing it till now. But something with a brand like Nike, we've got. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I get shoes, I tend to go to the same company, which I've been going to for a long time. I mean, that's the thing with my slippers and my sandals. Like, I go for the same company every time because it's like something based off of habit, right? So similar with chocolates, you get a chocolates like out of habit. I feel like a lot of people who get Nike shoes, they tend to stick with the same company, or at least that's what I'm assuming. So another thing is that like, are people's habits, they're willing to break those habits stronger than you know, like getting the firms to shut down. Like, then if you want to say that these firms should shut down, they should change their practices, you've also got to be willing to change your habits, which doesn't seem to be happening enough.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
completely. Alright, you go. You go.
I wanted to agree with Tanay there. I think that's a good point you bring up. And another thing is that I don't think like the government coming in will do like make that big of an impact, because I don't think the government sees this as a really big problem. We see that in many different countries. I think we could say places like China, or maybe like some form of control from America when they're like companies like Apple sort of enforcing their sort of practices in India now, like because they have the sort of trade war happening in China. So we see like different forms of this take advantage sort of like a sort of like way to take advantage from other like sort of third world countries. And I think that the point is like governments won't really see this and they'll sort of ignore this, and sweatshops will keep opening in various places even when they're sort of told to shut down. I don't think it's gonna make that big of an impact. Yeah.
So I think what we can take from that is that quite obviously, exploitation, it seems to be something which it's really difficult to shut down, isn't it? And it might carry on, especially while the world's population is growing, climate's getting worse. I have a feeling like that's just something which will accelerate exploitation. But I think with that, it's only right if we begin to wrap up the episode. Do you guys have any last remarks which you want to make?
Tanay, I like your shirt. Looking forward to City beating Liverpool tonight. So can't wait for that. But other than that, very sad exploitation.
Very sad.
Hopefully,
I guess
we've
it's
done
safe
much.
to. I think it's safe to ask Kushaj to do his homework, figure out what the IMF means.
International Monetary Fund.
Let's hope that Man City can exploit Liverpool as well, as part of that worker exploitation.
Let's go, lads. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very sad, how Foden owns Trent Alexander-Arnold. It's a bit sad how he exposed him there. But Shaq, see us out, please.
Alright, gentlemen, on that happy note, all about worker exploitation, Tanay's future job as an exploited worker, I'm glad we touched on it today. So anyways, we hope to see you back for another video. Our next one's gonna be just as absolutely...
Insensitive prick.
Our next episode is gonna be just as mind-bogglingly fantastic as Hiren's comment right there. So anyways, plug up Instagram is Hukt Podcast, like and subscribe, and see you next time.
See you.
Goodbye.